Hi everyone. So welcome. I'm Romy from Octopus Computers, and I'm very pleased to have you here today. So, as you know, today we wanted to do a webinar about basically how to manage your emails better. With that, there is a lot of new things coming, like SendMark and DMark. Like Elliot is going to cover all of that. Before we dive into the content, I would love to introduce John and Elliot. John, if you could tell me a bit about yourself and what you do, and give the hand to Elliot after.
Yeah, sure. So John from Octopus, I'm a nerd. I own and manage Octopus Computers, which is an MSP, so a managed service provider. We do whole of market IT services. So yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, thank you. And what about you, Elliot?
Yes, so I'm Elliot Wilkie. I'm the senior product specialist here at a company called Brigantia. We are a partner of Octopus Computers, but my role is primarily to be here from a technical perspective to discuss today's sort of discussion around, well, DMARC and email deliverability and security, really.
Thank you very much. So this is what we're going to cover today. So John will be talking about like email branding and consistency, how to keep your brand looking sharp across all your emails, and how to look like tools like Exclaimer and can really elevate your email signature. Then we'll move on with Elliot, who will walk us through mastering email deliverability. He will explain why emails sometimes don't make it to the inbox and practical ways to improve delivery rates and how better email security can actually help you win new businesses. At the end, we will also wrap up with a Q&A session. So pop your question into, I think there is a Q&A section. If you go on like the three dots at the top of your screen called More, you should see a Q&A place where you could ask any question you want. And we can answer all of that at the end. Yeah, I think we can get started. John, if you want to crack on with that.
Sure, let's do it. Cool. So we'll be really quick and to the point on this one. Elliot's going to go into much more of the technical side for deliverability, which would be all the fun, nerdy things that people like I get very excited about, which does matter enormously. But I thought before we go into that, it's probably worth talking about how we can protect your brand as well as your deliverable. So branding in this sense is very much how everything can look consistent across all of your company estate. As the first thing to do, we always recommend is that you standardize your signatures. And that is to say that when everything that goes out from the business looks the same, it starts looking like you all work in the same team. We see coming across our desk all the time, everyone has a go at creating their own, and it creates this disillusionment as to what the actual branding is. Alongside that, once you've created this standardized template, it probably is a good idea to make sure that everyone's using the correct logos, that everyone's got the correct links to the right social pages, that the branding is all correct, the same taglines are there, and probably put on your diary like to re-audit that every 3 months or so. It's a really quick check. You just need to get everyone to send you a simple email and check that everyone's signatures are the same. You can also, and what we really recommend is that you enforce signatures across all the staff. You don't want 5 out of 6 people to be sending with a signature and then one person, and it's nearly always in accounts, but one person is sending out something which is non-branded, can suddenly make it look suspicious to people who are used to receiving those emails. So you really want to make sure that everything is consistent, as I've said, across the lot. And then what I always recommend finally is for people to use campaign specific elements or something based around timing. So this could be something like, Merry Christmas is a really simple one that we see quite a lot of. But if you are running, say, a webinar, put in a link on your email signatures to say sign up to our upcoming webinar. If you are running a newsletter, you could put in there for people to sign up in the newsletter. And it's a really nice way of basically your marketing working a little bit more for you. It shouldn't just have contact details. You can actually control some active marketing going out to all your clients just when you're contacting them. Now, that's all quite a lot to do manually, so we actually recommend using some centralized tools to do so. Exclaimer is one that we partner with and recommend, but there's also one called Code 2. You can run some centralized systems within 365 and Google, but being honest, they're nowhere near as good. So I'd really recommend looking at a centralized tool where 1 or 2 people within the organization can then control these signatures for the entire estate, which means one person can update all of these banners, all of the contact details, everything that's coming up on that signature from a single place. And we use it internally. It makes everything a lot easier. It means that Romy keeps herself busy with more marketing efforts than I think she wants to, but it's definitely what we would recommend that people do. And that honestly is it when it comes to branding. It's not like there's much to go into in terms of any of the details. It's more about having a system, something which you're checking regularly, something which is managing it all for you. and having a bit of strategy going into it, being aware of the fact that if you don't have control of that, people will go off on a bit of a liberty, and you won't have that that control that you need to run the business smoothly.
Thank you very much, John. Elliot, would you like to share your slide? I'll let you lead in.
100%. Thank you very much. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is, I suppose, kind of two key areas around email itself, both from a security perspective and also the email deliverability side of things, which, of course, today's webinar is primarily focused on. But in terms of the security side of things, I just want to kind of quickly highlight a few of the things that we see on the screen right now, which is, well, one, we've got that big 91% figure that we see at the top there, which is basically indicating that 91% of cyber attacks are initiated via email. Now, that is a figure you might go, whoa, that's quite a high figure. But actually, if you think about it, it's not that surprising. All the times that you've seen maybe malicious content starting to come through to you, or people trying to get access to your systems, or people that are trying to, scam you or whatever it might be, those communications tend to be coming in via email rather than, say, someone sending you a malicious WhatsApp message or maybe a phone call. The idea is that they want to be able to utilize and take advantage of what people use most, which is most kind of communication method used day to day, which is email. You think about how you communicate with your clients, with your suppliers, with everyone else. Email is the kind of primary form of that communication. But there's kind of four key areas of email that we really wanted to focus on today, these four key pillars that we've got here, which begins with that impersonation side of things. And impersonation is what we're talking about is really much around people sending an email on your actual email address rather than it being, say, something like an impersonated email, or sorry, a sort of a lookalike email. So someone where they put maybe your own name at the top of the email, but it's coming from some random like Gmail or Yahoo email address. I'm talking about the fact that there are threat actors out there who are going to be taking advantage of the fact that they can send an email from your actual email address to then send that email to your clients and to your suppliers. Now, what I should mention with that is a threat actor does not need to have access to your systems in order for them to be able to do this. We need to remember that email as a standard has been around for about 40 or 50 years now and was never designed with security in mind. It was always meant as a way of being able to communicate a line of text or several lines of text from one place to another and send that over, kind of electronically and be able to ensure the communications are fast. But really what that means is that we're constantly patching and constantly kind of adding in like band-aids and plasters onto to make it more secure as time has gone on. But what threat actors can do and what they can utilize is the same sort of method that tools like, say, your MailChimp or your HubSpots or Sage, and how all these different tools are able to send out emails from your actual domain and your actual email address. Threat actors are using that same route to be able to send emails from your actual email address as well. And they wanted to do that because, well, if one of your clients receives an email from your email address, they're much more likely to trust that than they would do from something that's random and is not recognizable. On the other side of that, emails can also be intercepted in transit. When an email gets sent from point A to point B, it goes through a transit process. So it's not just magically appearing in the recipient's inbox. So when you send that email to your client, it goes through a transit process, and that threat actor can sometimes sit in the middle, and they can then monitor to see what these emails are saying. Now, they usually sit there quietly monitoring these emails to see what's going on, but then maybe they'll see a really good email that they want to intercept and change. So it might be something like a change of bank details, a notice that you're sending to your client saying, hey, you need to change, you need to send you send your invoice payments to this bank account rather than this previous one, and then you'll highlight that. And then what the threat actor will do is they'll sit in the middle, they'll see that email, and then they'll change those new bank details to their own rather than yours. And it means then that the recipient will then start paying the invoices to the wrong bank account. It's also worth noting that if they were to call you up and say, hey, I've just received this change of bank details notice, is that correct? You can turn around and go, yes, actually, this is correct. We are changing our bank details. And they go, okay, thanks very much. Bye. Put the phone down without actually clarifying if the numbers in that email are actually correct. But the other side of that, and really what we also want to be talking about today, is that deliverability aspect. You may have seen an increase in the emails that you're sending out, starting to end up either in a junk mail folder or in the maybe just straight up being bounced. And we're seeing that increase happening quite a lot recently. Lots more organizations coming to us saying, hey, we're seeing this increase in emails not being delivered. We need some help with it. I don't understand what's happening because nothing has changed. Well, actually, things have changed, but they've been changed elsewhere outside of your organization, which has necessitated kind of your emails to be now found in the junk folder. And then finally, it's also visibility around what's happening when you send those emails. We can very often track and quite easily track any emails that are coming inbound into your organization. But in terms of what happens when an email is getting sent, well, once you click that send button, to be honest, you're just hoping it lands in the inbox, and you just then will be told by the recipient if it happens to get into the junk folder, or maybe you'll receive one of those automated non-delivery reports that tells you, oh, this email didn't get delivered. But really, we want to have that visibility. We want to understand what's happening with every single email that's being sent from our domain. So just to give you a quick example of what an impersonation email actually looks like. So this is an email that's been sent to me, and it's coming from one ronald.mcdonald@mcdonalds.com. And Ronald here is saying, hey, Elliot, please find the following invoice attached. I'm traveling at the moment, so please will you pay this invoice urgently so we can continue working on this project. And basically the project's being on hold. Now, looking at this email, I might be encouraged to, act on this quickly, because the language in here is very much focused on, we need to pay this urgently. The project's been put on hold. So there's all this kind of like urgency about this. And also, don't contact me because I'm traveling at the moment, so I'm unlikely to pick up the phone because I might be on a train going through a tunnel. So there's that sort of, it's basically trying to get you to pay this. But as I'm looking through this email, I can see, okay, there are some areas of red flags being flagged up to me as this is potentially a risk. But one thing that I'll do as part of my security awareness training is that I'll be looking at this thinking, okay, well, let's check to make sure that this is coming from someone that I recognize, and if this is someone that I know. And sure enough, maybe I do genuinely speak to this Ronald McDonald, and that is his email address. So I might look at this and think, well, hold on a minute. My training tells me if that is different than what I'm expecting it, then that's going to be malicious. But my training is actually saying this could be trustworthy. So yeah, I'll just pay this to ensure that this project carries on as expected. But of course, because this has been an impersonated email, it means actually that was somebody that was a threat actor that sent that email rather than Ronald himself there. So the damage to your business is kind of, well, fourfold really. So we can see here that we've got, say, deposit fraud. I've obviously already mentioned that. Money being sent into the wrong bank account. It's much more likely to be the case if someone's saying, hey, by the way, pay the money to this bank account instead of the other one, and it's coming from what looks to be a legitimate email address. That can be quite scary, and obviously can cause loss of monies, both from the client's perspective and your own perspective, really. On top of that, it's much easier to distribute ransomware. Now, ransomware, just very quickly, is a high-level run-through of what it is. I'm sure you're maybe already familiar with this, but ransomware is when threat actors have managed to encrypt your services, encrypt your files, and you cannot get access to them unless you pay a ransom, usually in some form of cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency can't be tracked. And because of that, basically, you need to pay them, and then they'll give you access back to your files. That's obviously a loss of money from your client's perspective, because if they receive an email from you and it's got a ransomware link attached to it, and then they get ransomwared, then they're much more likely to click on that link because it's coming from to be a trustworthy source. But it's also worth pointing out, if someone's got ransomware and they can't get access to their systems or they can't get access to their files, are they really in a position to be able to pay your invoices? Probably not. And actually, on top of that, the ransom can also be really high and might cause their own kind of reputational damage. And it might actually mean that your client could well go out of business. And we see this quite a lot. I did see a figure some time ago, which I believe it said something like 50% of small businesses that get ransomware will go bust within a year after getting that ransomware. Well, that becomes a major issue, because now the suppliers are not getting that money from that client that's now gone bust. So that's a loss of revenue from your perspective. On top of that, identity theft is also increased as a result. So this is sort of twofold in its explanation. So you'll have threat actors that are impersonating your actual email address, which is pretty important, and you want to make sure that nobody's doing that and don't want to be impersonating who you are. But at the same time, if you receive an email from HR at of your own domain and it's saying something along the lines of, hey, can you please let us know, your date of birth, your home address, and your bank account details because we're updating our systems. The employees within that organization, within your organization, could well trust that and then actually send all those details across to that threat actor. That threat actor could then actually maybe take out, say, credit agreements or loan agreements in that person's name because they've got enough detail there to be able to do so. And of course, this all culminates into reputational damage. If a client of yours has received a ransomware link or the bank details have been sent, the bank details are incorrect, or maybe, HR app was incorrect, whatever it might be, there's huge reputational damage, both from a client perspective, a supply perspective, and your own internal employees as well. And that, again, could be ruinous to you guys as a business, not just for your clients and your suppliers, who are the ones who are going to be receiving these emails. So to give you an idea of what your existing protection looks like today, and you may recognize some of these vendors, some of these products on the board right now, so the likes of your Microsoft and your Google, but you've also got other third-party suppliers out there as well who are able to basically supply some form of email security. But the email security that they're looking at is about protecting your own internal staff. They're looking at protecting the inbound emails. But really what we're talking about today is protecting those outbound emails. So it's a bit of a switch in the way of how we think about email security, because we're always so obsessed about making sure that we protect ourselves, but we're not thinking about what happens on the outbound perspective. And really, actually, that's a broader scope, because that's encompassing, not just you internally, but it's also your clients, your suppliers, and the rest of the world. And the idea is that we want to make sure that DMARC is protecting against that. And that's really what it is doing. SendMark is the tool that we're using for this, but we won't be talking about SendMark in any detail today. Now, DMARC encompasses those 4 key pillars that I talked about earlier on. So that impersonation, interception, deliverability, and visibility. This DMARC standard, I'll be going into in a bit more detail in just a second, but it's really come about to ensure that all 4 of those key pillars are covered off under the single umbrella of DMARC itself. Now, what DMARC is, unfortunately, I cannot explain without first giving you an understanding of a couple of other acronyms, and I'm very sorry about this. Cybersecurity is full of acronyms, but I'll explain them very high level, so we should be able to come out of today's webinar with a good understanding around what's happening with each one of these 3. So SPF, it's a fairly old standard, stands for Sender Policy Framework, but to use an analogy, it's like an invitation list to a party. If you're not on that invite list, you're not allowed into the party. That's the idea of SPF. From a more technical perspective, it's a white list of services that you use to send out domains or send out emails, so that the recipient will then know, oh, this email has come from Microsoft or this email has come from MailChimp. I know I can trust this email because this person's put it on their whitelist. So it's you just telling the world, I use these services. If you receive an email from the service, then you can trust it. That's the idea around it. DKIM, which stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail, is basically like a wax seal on a letter. So the idea of a wax seal is that, well, it's twofold, really. The first being we're able to identify where the letter had originally come from based on the seal itself. But on top of that, the seal also serves a purpose in that if during the transit from that letter being sent from point A to point B and that seal breaks, then the recipient of that letter will know that there's a risk there that contents of that letter has been changed, or maybe is, maybe just been swapped out with something entirely different, and to not trust the contents of that letter. And DKIM is the modern day email equivalent of that wax seal. It makes sure that if that email gets intercepted in transit, then the recipient knows about that, and they know then to reject it or do whatever they need to do with that email. But the inherent risk of SPF and DKIM on their own is that we're essentially leaving the decision up to the recipient to decide what to do in the event that both of these fail. So if that wax seal gets broken or the service that it's being sent from is not on that invite list to the party, in essence. So DMARC then comes in to essentially provide you, as the domain owner, that control. The control is now yours and you're taking that back. And the idea of DMARC is that you are telling the recipients of an email to do something with that email in the event that those authentication checks, SPF and DKIM, if they both fail. In other words, it's like a bouncer to that party. They're the ones who are making that decision around whether or not that email should be delivered. Now, there are 3 different configurations for DMARC. And again, a little bit more technical, but it's worth understanding because this is important if you're the domain owner to understand what this actually means, because there are these different configurations here. Quite often, I'm being told by organizations, it's fine, we've got DMARC in place. What they usually mean is we're at that top stage there, which is in red, that P equals none, where there's no actual security happening on that domain. In other words, basically, as I mentioned before, there's that bouncer making the decisions about what to do with that email. Basically, that bouncer's going, okay, I've received this invitation. It's got a wax seal that's been broken, and the person's come from a service that I don't recognize, but it's fine. I'll just let them straight in. That's the idea of what it is. But the idea of DMARC is that it sends a report back to whoever originally sent that email. So basically, it's now telling you, oh, actually, when you sent that email, it went through this process and this was the result. Did we deliver it or did we not deliver that email? So that's what this report does. And I'll show you an example of what one of those reports looks like in just a second. Really, what we want to do is start to enforce some security, though, because at that P equals none stage, impersonation emails can still happen. And we want to prevent that from happening. So the P equals quarantine is when we're telling the recipients in the event that both the wax seal is broken and the email's coming from somebody that's outside of our kind of authorized sources. I want you, as the recipient of this email, to put that email either into the junk folder, or if there's a quarantine environment available, put it into the quarantine environment. And that's what that's doing. But it's worth remembering that the recipient in this case, if they receive a notification that something has gone into the quarantine environment, well, I'm just thinking about it from my own personal perspective, but I'm really busy. I'm going back-to-back calls all day. I receive maybe 100 emails a day. So if I receive a quarantine notification coming into my inbox, that frustrates me a little bit because it means I've got extra work now to go and investigate. What is this email? Is it legitimate? Who's the sender? And as I go into that, I'm maybe much less likely to actually look for the red flags. And I'll see it's coming from someone that looks to be legitimate, and I'll release that email, and then I'll pay the wrong invoice, or I click on a ransomware link, even though it went to the quarantine environment there. But it's because I don't have the time or the energy to be able to, constantly deal with emails going into my junk folder. So really, what we want to be doing as the domain owners is telling the recipients, just straight up bounce those emails. Do not deliver those emails whatsoever, because we want to reduce the risk as much as possible. And that's that P equals reject stage. And that's where we want to get to. So to give you some visualization of what this process actually looks like. So our domain at Brigantia, we're brigantia.com. And let's say I'm sending this email into yourselves, maybe even Octopus. So actually in this case, an email's going from Brigantia to Octopus, and it's coming from our Microsoft 365 environment. So that's a legitimate email that's being delivered into them. And what happens is that their environment will then have a look at what is known as our DNS. Sorry, another acronym, domain name system. You may be familiar with it, but it's basically where the SPF, the DKIM, and the DMARC is all hosted. And the idea is that Octopus's environment is now going to look at that and go, okay, this email's come from Microsoft, and does Brigantia actually have Microsoft on their kind of invite list for that party? Well, yes, they do. Fantastic. They're going to check to see if there's a wax seal on that email that I've sent. Yes, there is. Has that wax seal been broken? No. Okay, brilliant. So it passes DKIM there. And at this point, what Octopus will then do is they'll send me a report to tell me, we received this email from you. It came from Microsoft, and it passed SPF, and it passed DKIM. Brilliant. So I understand that from my perspective as the domain owner, and I've got this visibility on the outbound emails. But if we get an impersonated email coming from brigantia.com and it's being sent into Octopus, then Octopus's environment again is going to have a look at the brigantia.com DNS. And the reason for that is because it's coming from brigantia.com. So it's having a look at that data. It's checking to see, is this coming from a whitelisted source? Well, actually, no, it doesn't, because the attacker is going to have to use one of those, a different service than the ones that they see there. Otherwise, what they'd have to do is try and get access to those systems. But as I mentioned before, a threat actor doesn't want to do that because that's far too much effort, and they just want to fire out emails from a domain that is not being protected. So in that case, it will fail that invite list, that SPF that I mentioned earlier on. On top of that, 95% of times, an attacker won't even bother putting a wax seal on the letter that they send out or that email that they send out. But even if they did, with the way that DKIM works, that wax seal just breaks the moment that they send that email. So even in the scenario where they have tried to just put that wax seal on there, the people that's very smart people who came up with the idea of DKIM have kind of come up with that solution, and it will just break immediately. So in this case, what's going to happen is that now we've got a failure for both the invite list and the wax seal. And me, as the domain owner at briganti.com, I am going to be telling Octopus in this scenario, okay, this email fails the authentication checks. I want you to bounce those emails. So the impersonated emails will get bounced, but the legitimate emails will get delivered. And this is why it's so important that we make sure as domain owners, we take that control back. As I mentioned before, in this case, you'll get a report. Whether this email is coming from a legitimate source or whether it's coming from a malicious source, those emails will be, you'll get reports back every single time for those. And we want to bring those reports into a unified dashboard, really. And the reason why we want to put it into a dashboard is because, really, the actual reports look like this. And it's just lines of text and nonsense, basically. And it's very difficult to understand and very difficult to interpret. And it's quite time-consuming to interpret as well. And all of this that we see within here only represents one single email. So at Brigantia, as an example, we send about 10,000 emails per week, thereabouts, sometimes less, sometimes more, but 10,000 emails per week. Now, we're a 50 or 60 user organization. We do quite a bit of marketing activity, but that's not unusual really for our size of company. I've seen much smaller companies send even more emails than that. But if I was the person who had to go through one of these reports, and it took me just 1 minute to go through one of these reports, then what would happen is it would take me about 160 hours per week to go through every single one of these reports. I don't have 160 hours per week, and in fact, quite frankly, I'd go insane. But I need to understand what's happening with every single one of these emails to ensure that I'm not missing anything, because we want to make sure that we're encompassing all of our legitimate senders and all of the illegitimate ones as well. And that's why that's so important. And not only that, it's also worth mentioning that Google themselves and Microsoft recommend that you use a third-party service. And the reason being is because they don't want you to be going through those reports yourselves. I should also clarify at this point, Google and Microsoft, they do not provide a service to go and interpret these reports. So they're recommending go out there, purchase one, or find something that works for you, because doing this manually is just basically unobtainable and it's unachievable, and you're not going to understand everything that you need. One final slide, and then we'll kind of jump onto the Q&A section, is basically there's kind of a few recent changes that have happened in the world of DMARC. And the biggest one is that Microsoft have very recently basically said, you need to have DMARC in place. Now, there are some clarifications to this that I need to come out with. The first one is, in order for them to say you need to have DMARC in place, you need to send out 5,000 emails in a day. Now, that is a lot of emailing. As I mentioned before, at Briganti, we only send 10,000 emails per week. So it's a lot of email activity that needs to happen there. On top of that, it's only going to apply to emails that are being sent into Outlook.com, Live.com, and Hotmail.com addresses. So if they are Microsoft 365 but with their own domains, then those are not currently affected. However, there's a few points I want to make with this. The first one is Microsoft made the announcement a month ago, and it got enforced yesterday. So they provided 30 days notice for this, and that is, quite frankly, not enough time for organizations to make this work. And the other side of it is that a week ago today, they changed what was going to be happening to that email. So initially, when they first announced this, they said, if your domain does not have a DMARC record in place and you don't do DMARC and you send out more than 5,000 emails in a day, we will put those emails into the junk folder for those Outlook.com, Hotmail.com, Live.com and recipients. But a week ago, they changed their tact on that and decided, actually, we're just going to straight bounce those emails now. and they gave 7 days notice for that. So in fact, it was less than that, it was 6 days notice. So Microsoft have sort of played their hand a bit here and just turned around and said, actually, we don't really care about businesses. We're just going to enforce this, provide minimal notification on this, and we'll change our tact midway through as well. So yes, whilst this currently applies to 5,000 plus emails, and whilst it currently applies to only live.com, hotmail.com, outlook.com, they've played their hand. They are very likely to come out with an announcement in the next 6 months and then change their positioning. And they're going to now say, actually, it's going to apply to domain owners that only send 1,000 emails per week, or however much it might be, or even more so, and which I expect will happen. They will then actually say, actually, it's going to apply to every domain that's on Microsoft 365, not just outlook.com, live.com, hotmail.com. And we need to get ahead of the curve on this, because they do not provide enough notice time for anybody to appropriately go through the data to understand exactly what's happening there. 30 days is really not enough. 7 days to an additional change, it's actually quite scary. The other side of it is PCI DSS. Oh, sorry, before that, Google and Yahoo, by the way, have already gone through this process. So you may have already heard about Google and Yahoo doing DMARC. That was them doing that. Microsoft joined that brigade 30 days ago and are going into a full force. So, and now that we've got the big three, in essence, in the email world, this is just going to drive bigger kind of pushes into security for DMARC. So the other side of it is PCI DSS, and I put DORA twice there, DORA. PCI DSS, if you're unfamiliar, payment card industry, I forgot what the D stands for, but it's basically a security standard. But basically what it's doing is it's allowing organizations who take payment cards, then they store payment card information. It's a security standard that they need to follow. And that PCI DSS now requires, as of March this year, for you to have a DMARC record in place in order to be compliant. So again, we've got regulators starting to come down and regulations to come down and say that you need to have DMARC in place. DORA doesn't really apply to UK businesses because there's an EU-only act. And if I'm going to be completely honest, DORA doesn't specify anything about DMARC. However, DORA does talk about a lot of the areas that DMARC covers. So you can, if you need to be, if you work in the financial services environment and you work with EU businesses, you probably will need to be DORA compliant. And DMARC can help to get to DORA compliance across quite a few of their different areas. In terms of third-party contracts, you might be looking at that thinking, well, what's going on there? And this actually the whole kind of conversation around third-party contracts came about from a conversation that I had from a chief information security officer of a 60,000 person organization. So really big company, right at the top of the food chain there, this guy. And he was saying to me, we're investing so much money into our own internal security. We have got our own security operations center. We have all the best technology. We're investing, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pounds a year in this technology to secure ourselves as much as we possibly can. However, where we've started to notice the risks is in our supply chain. And they're starting to look and scrutinize the supply chain a lot more than they used to. And he said to me, we're looking at publicly available information because public information is what's also available to the threat actors. And DMARC, I should mention, is publicly available information. Anybody can look it up. Anybody can see what's happening. So they're looking at that information and they're checking to see what is the DMARC record in place for our suppliers. And they're now starting to go down the route of prioritizing suppliers who have got to that fully protected P equals reject state, rather than the ones that P equals none. On top of that, if you're wanting to win some new business and you're wanting to become a supplier for one of these bigger companies, then they will help put you in a better stead for ensuring that you win that business, because they'll be going after the organization that presents them with less risk. So they're going to be looking at, well, hold on a minute, we're up against, one company that's got P equals none and one company that's got P equals reject. They're going to go, well, we'll go with the company with P equals reject then, because they're going to have less risk to us as a business, and we're much less likely to be involved in a data breach or have any sort of cyber attack against us. So that, again, really important to understand, what's going on there with those third-party contracts, and helps you actually win business, because the conversation goes beyond just cybersecurity here. It's about ensuring that the emails that as a business owner or as, the salesperson or whoever it might be, this can help you win new business moving forward. And then finally, cyber insurance. We're seeing this come up a lot more in cyber insurance questionnaires at the moment as well, asking, have you got a DMARC record in place? And some of them have started to ask what that DMARC record looks like. Is it P equals none, quarantine, or reject? And we have seen some instances as well where having that DMARC record at P equals reject reduces the premiums for that cyber insurance. An extension on that as well is, the idea's just gone from my head. It's probably not having a script. It's like when you come up with ideas, I'll come back to it. So, but yeah, cyber insurance, big area that you kind of need to focus on with that. And it helps to reduce those premiums. And that's it from me. So, Romy, John, I'm going to hand back to you both to see if we have any questions. And actually, I've seen one actually just come in.
We've got quite a few. I've got just two from mine before we go through the questions. We had some sent in ahead of the webinar as well, I'm afraid. So bear with us. We'll go through them as quick as we can. First one I wanted to ask is, if Microsoft and Google are starting to enforce DMARC, is there a reason that it's not in place as default?
So in terms of why is Google and Microsoft why it's not in place as default within the domain itself? It's truth be told, it's because you as the domain owner need to configure your DNS, your domain name system that I mentioned earlier on. And the default configuration is kind of minimal. They don't know who what services you're going to be using. So you need to configure that SPF element. So are you going to be using Microsoft? Are you going to be using MailChimp? Are you going to be using Sage or Google or whatever else it might be? You need to then configure those DKIM keys, the wax seals and the letter. And then you need to have that DMARC record there as well. But part of that DMARC record, so I talked about, sending those reports back to you. Well, they need to know, where do those reports go? Because it needs to be sent to you somewhere, and you need to specify where you want them to go to. Well, they don't know where that will be. So it's a default configuration is not, it just doesn't work.
By the sounds of it.
There is no default configuration.
Cookie cutter it,
Exactly that. It's bespoke to every organization.
No, that's good, which is why it probably matters. The other one I wanted to just sort of pick your brains on before we dive into the questions from Romy. I've seen in the last week 3 major cyber attacks. We've had M&S, Harrods, I think, was one. Fortnum and Mason, I've seen. There's a few of them have been coming through. I also, because I'm a nerd, looked up and saw that none of them had active DMARC records. Do you think there could be a connection there?
Whilst they haven't released any information about the data breaches they've been involved in, but yes, I wouldn't be surprised if that has come about as a result. So they're all on P equals none, so there's no security against those domains. What could likely have happened is somebody may have, from outside of M&S, Co-op, Harrods, may have sent an email, very much like what I mentioned before, like HR at, but maybe it was like the CEO of of Co-op or M&S, and they found their email address, their actual email, and sent a company-wide email to everyone saying, hey, we're running a campaign or we're running a survey. We want to understand kind of how you feel about working for M&S or Co-op or Harrods. And we'd love you to fill this out. Please click on this link to do so. And that link will then end up probably showing a blank page because there's nothing there. But that clicking of that link will then initiate a payload, and it will then generate a cyber attack, ransomware, whatever else it might be. Or they might be trying to capitalize. I know Harrods, the previous owners of Harrods, have been in the news quite a lot recently for rather controversial matters. So again, it might be this sort of employee satisfaction survey. We want to make sure to ensure that all of our employees are happy, and they'll try and capitalize on that because it's contextual. People are much more likely to trust something that is very much like I would sort of expect this email from the company CEO in the event where something is quite a public controversial issue.
Element of it so strong nowadays, and I think effectively not having these in place is like leaving the door open in my mind. It's inviting this sort of attacks, but it is staggering to me that such large companies still haven't got it there. Especially because they are sending 5,000 emails a day, just on orders. It's wild that it's not in place. Anyway, they were the 2 for me. I just wanted to pick your brains on. So Romy, do you want to start reading things out, and then either Elliot or I will jump in?
Absolutely. So first one is for Elliot. What should a small business focus on first?
Yeah, so small businesses should focus on ensuring at the very least that SPF and DKIM are in place. That's the absolute minimum kind of expectation. And then after that, put DMARC in. But really, you can kind of do all three at once. You can have your DMARC there, but at P equals none. It will have no impact on email deliverability by having it there at that P equals none stage. And if anything, it might help improve email deliverability because you have that record existing. So very much like focus on those three key areas pretty much at once, but you start at P equals none because it's a journey that you need to go through. You can't just go straight to P equals reject because, as I mentioned before, the way that DMARC works, if those authentication checks fail, then you're telling recipients to bounce those emails. But if your legitimate services haven't been configured properly, then you could be telling recipients to bounce your legitimate emails as well. And we don't want that. So the purpose of those reports that I was talking about earlier on is to tell recipients, to tell yourself, basically, right, what is happening to my environment and what do I need to do to configure it better? And that's where you can lean on support of, Octopus or whoever it might be. Trying to be salesy, but it can get very technical. And is often kind of meant more for, as John says, the nerds in the world to look at that information.
I would say to check where you are, or perhaps the next steps, SendMark actually has a great little tool. You go to a website, which is tools.sendmark.com, and we can email out a link or put it in chat. You can just put your domain name in there and it will give you a score. I like this for two reasons. Firstly, when you type our company in, we look great because we're quite secure, but it honestly is a brilliant prompt to say, this is what you've got, these are the next steps, this is your risk and what you're comfortable with. It's a really good one that I think everyone should be checking, and if you aren't comfortable with where you are, speak to someone, address it.
Yeah. John, got one for you. What is an example of a centralized tool for branding?
For email branding, I would say something like Exclaimer is a brilliant one to use for those kind of pieces. If it's a broader company branding, it's brand guidelines. Having something that says this is our logo, what it looks like, the spacing that's required around it, the background, the RGB or CMYK codes for print, however you want to approach it. First, you need to document what your branding needs to be, and then you need a tool to manage it across all the users. So there's two elements to that. But if you've got your guidelines nailed, then I would say for email, especially using something like Exclaimer or Code 2 are both management areas where you can see all of the users, build out the signatures, and go from there.
Very nice. Another person asked, I've seen email signatures vary across my team. How can I make sure everyone's using the same format?
Nice, doubling down on a question. I love it. Get a centralized management system.
There you go.
You're able to, so as I say, the easiest way first to check that is to get everybody to email you. So send out a company-wide email, assuming that you've got your DMARC in place. It won't look too suspicious. Everyone will then email you back with just a test, see what signatures come up on internal messages, and just have a quick check. Now, once you're above 50 users, that's arduous. You should have a system in place already. But certainly when you're at the SME side, a quick manual check, not even too regularly, but at least do it once, see that everyone is consistent. And if they aren't, using a tool is a great way to bring it all in line.
Nice. Another one asked, can a tool like Exclaimer work with Office 365 or Google Workspace without making things complicated?
It can make things complicated, and it actually makes things complicated as well with tools like SendMark, because the emails are passing through a separate server to go out. So the same for the SPF and things. It is reasonably complex perhaps to configure the technical side, but it's quite rare that people are self-deploying these tools anyway. They're not expensive either way, no matter where you're buying them from. But I would say that this is the risk, especially I think Elliot will agree, with adding in third-party email sending without having a managed system like SendMark can be quite risky. So bolting on Exclaimer, easy to do. It does work and play well with Google and 365. But if your IT company or if you haven't adjusted your SendMark or your DMARC rules appropriately, suddenly you've got this lovely signature and no one's going to see it because it's going to bounce if you've not authorized it. Yeah. So yes, but play safe.
I think that's one will be for you, Elliot. How does email security actually help us win trust with potential clients? I mean, both of you actually.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of mentioned that already. So,
Yeah.
the kind of larger organizations and even the smaller ones are starting to look at this now. But, you want to go out for like tender contracts or whatever it might be. They're looking at what your email security currently is because they want to reduce their own risks. So they're looking at their existing supply chain or new business, and they want to understand, where's the risk for me to start working with you? Yes, there might be two companies, one that's slightly cheaper than the other, but if the more expensive one provides less risk, well, they'll just go down that route because actually in the long term it could save them money, because if they then get involved in, say, ransomware, not only is there the fact that they have to pay the ransom with ransomware, but there's loss of revenue as well. So we need to ensure that actually, hold on, the less risk will provide us with actually a potential saving in the long term than it would be with that cheaper organization. So that helps to build that trust amongst your clients as well.
Nice.
Just to add to that, I think you alluded to it, but there are compliance check marks that people are starting to seek out as well. So DORA is a great example. NIST 2 probably comes into effect reasonably soon, although more for larger enterprise. ISO 9001, Cyber Essentials, your cyber insurance, all of these questionnaires that every company is starting to be bombarded with nowadays for resilience. Being able to say, yes, we do it and here's how, saves you so much headache when those questions start coming through.
Definitely.
I think you did answer that, Elliot, but I'm still going to ask it. Sometimes clients say they didn't get my email. What could be causing that, in very short, if you can?
Yeah, of course. So it could be a multitude of different things, but it's usually your SPF, your DKIM, your DMARC hasn't been set up right. That tends to be the issues. And if you have been sending a lot of emails from kind of maybe sources that you maybe haven't configured properly, it can blacklist your domain. And then finally, there's one scenario which I didn't cover off, but I'm actually going to talk about an example. So I appreciate we're kind of wanting to wrap up in a second, but it is worth knowing that 5,000 threshold for Google, Microsoft, Yahoo. That's 5,000 emails coming from your domain, but they do not care where they came from. We had a 30-person cleaning company. They sent about 100 emails per week, which are just basically invoices to their clients who are all private individuals who are using like Gmail. Their invoices are not getting delivered. And then when we put their domain into SendMark, and what ended up happening was we saw that there was about 30,000 emails a day coming from their email from the domain because they were under attack. Now, Google then flagged them up as a bulk sender because of that. These emails weren't coming from them directly, but it was coming from their domain, and that's all they care about. So that's why it's important to understand what's happening there. Hopefully that was short enough.
Yeah, that's perfect. Good. Thank you. I've got 3 last questions. Is DMARC something I can do myself, or do I need an IT support to handle it? I think you answered that as well earlier. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it yourself. You're more than welcome to go through those reports manually and understand what's going on. But as I say, Google, Microsoft, they both recommend they use a third-party tool, and to interpret that information is incredibly difficult. It's not as simple as it may seem. As like, oh, sure, it's just coming from one place to the other. You will find information that just does not make sense. And you then need to understand what's happening with DMARC in order to interpret what that means. It's technical. It's very technical.
I would say I normally try and demystify and remove the smoke and mirrors that IT has been known for about 30 years. But in this instance, I actually, you need help with it. We certainly use a tool for it. It's not something we could do internally. And I think it's nigh on impossible, if I'm being honest, to manually interpret all of the data. You could set up a base level for yourself. Don't get me wrong. Like Elliot said, you could do the P equals none, but that is inherently presenting risk, which isn't necessary. So there's a couple of steps you could take, but to do it well, ask for help.
Nice.
Absolutely.
Have you got anything else to say?
No, sorry.
No, sorry. It's okay. How do I know if my domain has DMARC set up properly?
So that tools.sendmark.com actually will be able to tell you that straight off the bat. So it will tell you, have you got your DMARC in place? And if there are any issues with your DMARC, it will tell you that. Also, will tell you if there are any issues with your SPF as well. So we'll say if something's not been configured properly, there's something known as a lookup limit. So in other words, how many sources or senders are allowed to send emails from your domain. If you exceed that, then that can cause issues as well. So it will tell you that at a very high level what's happening there and you'll see that within your score there.
Nice. Last one, how long does it take to set up?
To set up very quickly, 30 seconds to a minute, something like that. To go to P equals reject, it's a process. It depends on the organization, but we tend to see usually less than 90 days.
Right. Thank you. I think we are done with the questions. I don't know if there is any more, but I think we did all of them. Thank you very much, Elliot, for joining us today for this webinar.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Elliot.
We'll be sending the record around for the ones who couldn't make it. And thank you so much for the one who could attend, and hope we enjoyed it. And we'll do another webinar probably in the next 6 weeks. So please stay tuned. We'll send everything through newsletter, LinkedIn, all of that. So yeah, keep an eye on it. And thank you so much, John, as well. And speak to you soon.
Yep. Speak to you all soon. Cheers.
Bye-bye.